years ago, while on one of my history rabbit holes, which happens a lot, I kind of got obsessed with Jenny Lind, 19th century Swedish-born superstar that was beloved throughout all of Europe. Fans would constantly follow her, and roses rained down on the stage whenever she performed. Queen Victoria herself would frequently attend her performances, which seems like such an ego boost. She was basically the Beyonce of her time. One day I was mentioning my fascination with one of my movie friends, and they exclaimed, "Oh, like in The Greatest Showman." And I was like, what? This is gonna age me, but as a working adult with very little time to absorb all the pop culture references out there in the ether, I saw the movie trailer and was immediately not interested. A handsome P.T. Barnum looked weird to me, and Jenny Lind wasn't even mentioned in the trailer, so I was like, oh, whatever. Fast forward to 2021, and I finally had time to see, a 4-year-old movie. I watched it all the way through, and my reaction was, Wait, hold on. So the movie has some merits. A very simple storyline with fantastic musical numbers means its message of diversity acceptance is very palatable to a younger audience. That's all fine. But the way these two are portrayed while wifey is at home taking care of the kids is just... No, God! So I became irritated enough to make a YouTube video about it, as a normal person would. So this video isn't just going to talk about my annoyance. No, it's also going to talk about what really happened, the conception of the US tour, how they met, the fans, oh my God, the fans, and what actually happened on the road, because let's be honest, the truth is much more interesting than what the movie made up. Joanna Maria Lind was born in 1820 in Stockholm, Sweden, and came to fame by the age of 17 from her performance in Carl von Wagner's opera Der Frühling. Her operatic career spanned over 11 years and eventually became known as the Swedish Nightingale to all of her adoring fans. The term Lindomania was coined in 1840s England to describe how fixated her fan base acted towards her. There was one problem though. She was really concerned about the negative reputation that was associated with actresses in her time. For you see, in 19th century Europe and American societies, a performer of the female persuasion was seen about one step above a prostitute. Women were meant to stay within the private sphere of society, while men went out into the world to bring home that sweet, sweet bacon. A woman who not only worked, but whose work was to give pleasure and elation to a mass of people was seen as immoral. But Jenny was devout and worked tirelessly throughout her entire career to combat against this reputation, and would be constantly promoted as who she really was, a deeply religious person. While traveling across Europe in the 1840s, she would only be in the company of female companions and stay with families of impeccable and pious reputations. It must have not been enough, because by May of 1849, at the height of her career, she decided to retire from the opera scene and focus more on oratorios and recital performances, specifically charity concerts. 7 months later, an opportunity came a-knocking that was too good to ignore. Oh my God, I'm starting to lose it, guys. Like, it is late. We can't get into too many details about Barnum's life because we would be here all damn day, but here are the facts we need to know. Phineas Taylor was an entrepreneur and museum proprietor, famous for fantastical displays of oddities and wonders, and for being a scum human being to his employees. This included people like Joyce Heth, a slave he bought and claimed to be George Washington's 161-year-old nursemaid. When she died at the actual age of 80, he hosted a live autopsy attraction. I wonder why they didn't mention that in the movie. Known as the Prince of Humbugs, he was infamous even in his days for his misleading tactics and aggressive advertisements. By the late 1940s though, he wanted to move away from the image of a crass promoter to someone who brought culture to the United States. I had long been associated with humbug, and the American public suspect that my capabilities did not extend beyond the power to exhibit stuffed monkey skin. Gross. In 1849, he conceived an idea of a US tour focused on one famous singer and him as the tour manager. Barnum was already aware of Jenny Lind from his European tour and thought she would be the perfect choice. But he never actually heard her perform and even admitted to being unmusical. His decision was solely based on the moral and musical reputation she had cultivated over the years. Barnum sent a representative to England to pitch the idea to Lind, who eventually agreed to that because she saw it as a way to further distance herself from the opera world while raising education funds for orphans in Sweden, which, of course. The agreement was signed on January 9th, 1850, with the premiere to take place the following September. It stated Jenny would sing 150 performances over the course of 18 months in the United States, Canada, and Havana. Barnum agreed to pay her $1,000 per performance, and room and lodgings were covered for her and her entourage. In addition, Barnum agreed that if he got 100% return on his investment after 75 performances, Lind would receive an additional 20% of the net profits from the remaining tour. Long story short, he threw money at this venture. I can afford to lose $50,000 in such an enterprise as bringing to this country, in the zenith of her life and celebrity, the greatest musical in the world. So we have just laid out the principal characters and the why for this tour, but we also have to kind of talk about how Barnum brought Lindomania to America, which is like his crowning achievement. This section is going to be kind of short because if there is one thing that everybody knows about P.T. Barnum is that he is the godfather of modern promotion. And this tour was his magnum opus, his swan song, his ninth symphony, the art of getting people to give a shit about a thing. And if there was one thing Americans did not give a shit about in 1849 was Jenny Lind herself. So Barnum was under extra pressure to create excitement for a tour starring a singer that was utterly unknown in the States. But he went balls to the walls on this project, and spoiler alert, he did a really good job. Barnum's branding tactics borrowed from the moralistic reputation that Lind had cultivated in Europe and centered on three main themes: her popularity in Europe, artistry as a coloratura, and her angelic charitable nature. He formally announced the tour in February of 1850, and which stated the following: "Since her debut in England, she has given to the poor from her own private purse more than the whole amount which I engage to give her. A visit from such a woman who regards her high artistic powers as a gift from heaven for the melioration of affliction and distress, and whose every thought and deed is philanthropy, I feel persuaded will prove a blessing to America, as it has to every country she has visited, and I feel every confidence that my countrymen and women will join me heartily in saying, God bless her." I have to say, the one annoying thing about reading anything from before the 20th century is that no one believed in ending a sentence. Hype for the Swedish Nightingale grew exponentially before her arrival. Poetry contests were held with $100 prizes. Store owners would plaster her face on every piece of merchandise that you could think of. Here's a brief list for y'all: paper dolls, pianos, cigars, coins, flasks, sheet music, and a steamboat. And this was such a brilliant tactic because the merchandise was designed to be affordable to the middle class, further showing that she was a singer for the masses, not the elite. And this worked so well. By the time she had boarded the boat in Liverpool to come over to the United States, Americans had already declared their love for her, and they hadn't even heard her sing yet. When she arrived in New York, over 30,000 eager spectators were there to greet her on the piers. Barnum went up the gangplank to actually meet her for the first time. Like, yes, they already have a history. They never even met yet. Like, oh my God. This whole situation still must have been baffling for Jenny, because one of the very first things that she asked him was where he actually heard her. He replied, "I never had the pleasure of seeing you before in my life." and further explained why he actually hired her. "I risked it on your reputation, which in musical matters I would rather trust than my own judgment." The premiere at Castle Garden had, quote, "the largest and most enthusiastic crowd before which she had ever sung," and required additional security just to handle the overwhelming crowd. Premium seats were being sold at auction, with the first ticket going for $225 in 1850 money. So that's this money. Almost everywhere she went, people would crowd her just to get a glimpse at the living angel. Indeed, Lindomania had reached America. So there were a few bumps along the way, but overall, the tour went really well. So they went from New York, South Carolina, Havana, New Orleans, and then kind of back up to New England. Gets kind of in that little circle. So everything seemed to be going well until May of 1851, when it was publicly announced that Lind and Barnum had mutually agreed to reduce the number of performances to 100. There's a few legitimate reasons why you would want to reduce the tour. The tour schedule was very ambitious, with each performance happening on average every 4 days, while the majority of travel was either by carriage or ship. Both modes of transportation were temperamental at the best of times. Along with that, Jenny was doing charity concerts on the side for various causes, so it made sense why they want to end the tour early. Like, they were just tired. So both parties agreed to 100 performances altogether. All right, done. That's a nice, clean number.
Good guess, but actually no.
Lind decided to abruptly end the contract after the 93rd concert the following June. Now you may ask yourself, why? Well, that's a very good question. That's kind of up in the air. All the biographies I read stated that this incident was an immediate mutual termination, but I have worked in corporate America long enough to know that immediate mutual termination really means shit went down and we shouldn't see each other anymore. Now, we may never know the whole truth of what actually happened in this incident, but there are several theories out there. And so this means we actually kind of have to go into rumor/speculation territory just for a moment. So take the following list with several grains of salt. So in March of 1851, Jenny wrote to a family friend while in New Orleans about being really homesick. "By the middle of June, I hope to be finished with Barnum." This is the furthest she had ever traveled from Sweden for an extended period of time, and New Orleans was just probably the opposite environment for her. The tour's aggressive schedule had also put physical strain on Lind's voice and would have to take periodic breaks to just recover. There is also evidence that Jenny had disapproved of the showmanship Barnum displayed when the performances were being published. The tour was being advertised in the same way as some of Barnum's outlandish attractions, like Tom Thumb and the Bearded Lady. And she thought the tour was not being treated with the same dignity as her previous European performances. But these two reasons are from Jenny's point of view. What did Barnum have to say about the situation? Well, okay, this last one is going to be probably the most suspicious of all, but just run with me here. According to one of his memoirs, Barnum claimed that some of the members of Lind's entourage did not trust Barnum in general because of his humbug reputation and felt new management was needed for the remainder of the US tour. Lind had desired to take on the management role herself. I mean, the two reasons from each party just are like polar opposite from one another. One of them is just tired, she can't sing anymore, and she just kind of wants to go home, and the other side is like,
Mutiny, that is.
But I do want to give this clarification that there was no romantic attraction between them, and this kiss scandal scene didn't actually happen. These two had a business relationship and were somewhat cordial to each other, which is even debatable depending on which biography you read. And that was it. That was it. There was literally nothing. I'm sorry for all the people that think that Jenny Lind is this home-wrecking monster, while Barnum's wife is at home missing him, which isn't even true. Barnum and his wife didn't even really like each other. It was, it was a marriage of convenience. Anyway, we're moving on. Whatever the reason, or it could have been a combination of all three of these, the agreement ended on June 9th, 1851. At this point, the tour only ran for 9 months, but Barnum had made a gross profit of $535,000 in 1851 money. Jenny's net profit alone was $176,000, which excluded the large charitable contributions she gave to various causes in each city. All of this money in less than a year.
Hot damn!
So you would think after making all this money and missing Sweden so much, Jenny would go home, right? Well, wrong. Jenny, with the help of her advisors, decided to continue on with the tour as her own impresario, which in those days is just a ballsy thing for a woman to do. So Barnum was a little right. I mean, maybe. So can we remind ourselves what Jenny did in the movie? Oh yeah, quit and just went home. Just I'm not going to sugarcoat on this one. The post-Barnum US tour was problematic pretty much from the get-go. Barnum announced the termination of the agreement to the newspapers, and most people assumed the tour had just ended. Max Hortzberg, Jenny's secretary, had to release a clarification statement the following day, and even went so far as to say that Barnum's announcement was calculated and misleading, which we're talking about Phineas Taylor here, so duh. He explained that Jenny had to take time off for rest and relaxation from, quote, fatigue and exertion as a result of the tour. After that, she may, if her strength permit, make a short tour in Western New York and Canada. Yes, Lind was tired and homesick and probably having issues with her voice again, but she did not want to disappoint fans who had not had a chance to hear her perform yet. Despite the lack of manager experience, the tour commenced again 9 days later in Philadelphia, with much of the same enthusiasm as the previous concerts. But with as much foreshadowing as I can muster, the tour would end up dealing with two major issues along the way. So one of the persistent issues Lind faced while managing the tour were speculators, aka ticket scalpers. They did exist during Barnum's reign, but the tickets were expensive because they were going through auction houses to maximize profit. Tickets would be auctioned off 3 days prior to the concert, then the remaining seats would be available at the box office. And most of the concerts would sell out within a day. High risk, low reward for a scalper. When Jenny took over management, she decided to forego the auction system and set all ticket prices at a more affordable prices depending on the location. She detested the auctioning process and the high prices associated with it because it prevented many fans from seeing her perform. Oh, but the advisors were aware that this could create a problem. So what did they do? They limited the sale of tickets to 10 tickets per customer. And that's it.
How about me, boss?
Oh yeah, one for you. And me, boss. One for you. And me, boss. One for you.
So no surprise, the new ticketing strategy did not prevent scalpers from profiting off of her concerts. Speculators saw that Lind's concerts were a hot commodity now with cheaper tickets, and you could buy them en masse. A low-risk, high-reward endeavor. Newspapers like the New York Daily Times started giving suggestions for dealing with this speculator problem. Here is their crummy advice from a May 1852 article. To suspend the speculator problem, we would suggest that those who manage the affairs for Miss Lind, that they retail the tickets for the Castle Garden concert. Let them sell directly to the individual at the original prices. It will be found wiser on the average to please the people than the speculators. Why am I doing all these in British accents? I know that was really mean for a newspaper to publish that, but you kind of have to understand where America was in terms of the idea of ticket resellers. This tour was the first recorded incidence of ticket reselling on such a massive scale. Audience members were justifiably pissed because they had to pay more than what was advertised. The box offices were genuinely confused. Jenny Lind and her advisors just did not know how to control the situation because it never actually happened like this before. And the newspapers had taken notice of this kind of market manipulation that was going on. So what can you do in this scenario? So because of this market phenomenon that was evolving before people's eyes, Jenny's management style was seen as naive and inexperienced, which is true, but it was so grossly exaggerated. I mean, there could be worse things that ticket resellers like a scandal, but musicians never deal with scandals, right? Right? One Once Barnum left the tour in 1851, Lind was able to retain this public persona of the charitable person, but felt the strain of being both in the limelight and on the management team. Before the agreement termination, Barnum's reputation as a humbug ensured that any negative repercussion towards the tour would be aimed at him and not at Lind, for she was saintly, an angel, and woman without fault. The longer she managed the tour, the more flaws would be revealed that the American public did not admire. But the greatest sin that irked both her fans and critics occurred in February of 1852. This woman, Jenny Lind, had the audacity, the impudence
of getting married.
Why would they do this?
We have to go back in time to before the tour in order to introduce Otto Goldschmidt. Otto was a German pianist who was friends with Jenny and had performed with her several times in the past. He joined the US tour in May of 1851 before this whole termination agreement thing occurred. After Barnum left the tour, Jenny would give Goldschmidt several solo numbers for each performance. She saw Otto as a dear friend and an exceptional performer who deserved some of the spotlight. But critics did not share that same enthusiasm. From their perspective, he was a fine accompanist, but was uncharismatic when compared to the glamorousness of Jenny Lind. If Lind was aware of any of these harsh comments, she showed no attempt to rectify the situation. The two gradually fell in love while on the tour and married in secret on February 5th, 1852 in Boston. Aww. When it was announced the following day, it just shook the nation. Or at least the newspapers. Boston's Daily Transcript gave a commentary of people's reactions throughout the city. Jenny Lind is married, the Nightingale is mated, the bird is caged. There's no Jenny Lind now. She's a goner.
That escalated quickly.
The reactions were extremely divided. Many newspapers congratulated the couple for their nuptials, while others disapproved of the union for several reasons. Otto is still relatively unknown to the American public, and some thought Lind could marry a man with higher social status. If Lind had wanted to marry a musician rather than a member of royalty or of nobility or a captain of industry, she could have chosen from among the great in her art, or at least someone whose playing did not actively annoy her audiences. Oh my god. Some critics were also quick to point out the age difference between the newlyweds. In 1852, Jenny had reached the age of spinsterhood at 31, while Otto was only 22 when they tied the knot. It seems kind of silly nowadays, but the fact that she was older than him was a big deal in the 19th century. One critic from the Home Journal viewed the marriage as Jenny's downfall from grace and popularity. The Nightingale has cut her wings. The angel has become a woman. The divinity has descended from her pedestal. The prestige has disappeared. A part of me reads these accounts of this whole marriage and it just thinks, wow, the fans can't really be listening to the newspapers. The newspapers are just over-exaggerating things, right? But that's the problem. When you have a medium like newspapers that have the sole monopolization of the public opinions being spread outward, then the more that people read this, the more that they start to believe it, that it is the truth. That some people would end up believing that her marriage to Otto ended up being a detriment to not only her performance, but to her personality, to her own being. I mean, how often do we see nowadays where one celebrity does an event, or not even that, an action, and the media just kind of overblows the entire situation? Obama wore a tan suit one day, and that was considered the scandal of the week. I mean, I guess every famous person has to go through this, and this was Jenny's turn. So you may think that she would end her tour after her marriage, right? Nope. The Goldschmidts enjoyed a 3-month honeymoon before continuing the last stretch of the tour. I'm sure it was amazing for the lovebirds, but this break wasn't really a good thing for the tour. The public was kind of burnt out with her as a public figure, and post-marriage concerts were not very successful compared to her previous ones. Her novelty wore off, and concert programming was starting to be viewed as monotonous. Commentators became very critical, especially when concerts did not sell out. One newspaper made this brutal comment: Miss Lind has never succeeded since she left the guardianship of Mr. Barnum, and then she has had poor advisors and has been so ill-humor when even the homage paid her talent was not manifested with the greatest enthusiasm. By May of 1852, Jenny realized she had stayed in America too long. Lind's final performance was held at Castle Garden in New York on May 24, 1852. The concert hall was not packed, extra security was not required to handle frantic crowds, and the profits came to about $7,000, well below her premiere night to about $18,000. Despite the decline of Lindomania, her last performance received glowing reviews from critics. And among the audience was an enthusiastic P.T. Barnum, finally watching her perform for pleasure, not business. After the closing concert, Jenny, Otto, and the rest of the team left for Europe on May 29th. A few hundred people stood outside of her hotel as they left at 5 a.m., and 2,000 devoted fans wished her a fond farewell as they boarded the SS Atlantic, which is nice. I mean, popularity fizzled out, but it was still nice. So why am I talking about this? Why discuss the characters and the tour itself and kind of the ramifications of all of it? Well, and it's just all because I got frustrated with a movie. It is expected that biopics will have the minimum amount of accuracy to be, quote, based on true events, but there is no standard to that statement. Movies have been increasingly criticized by audience goers for inaccurate depictions of people and events. I'm fine with movies exaggerating or condensing timelines and events in order to make a more coherent story, but this was not the case here. The Greatest Showman was simply inspired by the idea of real-life people and events and made a story around that. So much that they didn't even bother with the based on true events sign. It's just not there. And I know a lot of people are going to say, it's just a movie, not a documentary. What is the big deal? The movie portrayed a showboating narcissist as a wholesome family man with nothing but the best of intentions, while making a charitable superstar as a shallow homewrecker. I feel a sense of dishonesty whenever I think of the movie, and thereby the lesson it tries to invoke. And that sucks. That is not what I want to feel whenever I watch a movie about diversity acceptance. Like, a large population of moviegoers nowadays are aching for portrayals of people from marginalized groups to feel represented and heard. This would have been a great example of a 19th century woman who is able to be her own authority in her life while challenging the social persona of the female performer, while using her wealth and status to help improve the lives of people around her. She was a good person and role model, and the movie did her dirty. The Greatest Showman itself is a humbug, flashy and entertaining that draws you in, yet misleading and false underneath the surface. Barnum would have been proud.